Okay, so imagine now we've set up a situation where the psychopaths are no longer punished for their manipulative, invasive, and narcissistic attention-seeking behavior. In fact, they're facilitated because they create a furor and they attract attention. Okay, now then imagine this. As we enable the psychopathic narcissists, they exert a disproportionate influence on the political process. And they drive polarization. Now, they do that partly because they like chaos, right? If you're a failure, if you're a resentful, bitter failure, one of your best bets is to flip the bloody social system upside down because you might be able to garner some short-term advantage in the ensuing chaos. That's a typical parasitic predator strategy. Wreak havoc and then feast in the ruins. Right, precisely. Okay, the danger I see on the liberal side, and this is a consequence of having watched this for a very long period of time, is that because the more liberal types are incapable of drawing boundaries, they can't tell to what degree they've been invaded by the psychopaths. Now, you tell me what you think. I'm watching the universities burn at the moment. Now, you could say that some of that's because the protesters are shocked by what's going on in Israel. And I'm just going to leave that aside because war is shocking and people have reason to be shocked.
Yeah, right. Gaza, people are dying,
But by the same token, it seems to me to be a naivety beyond comprehension to presume that those encampments aren't simultaneously being invaded by people who are manipulative and psychopathic beyond comprehension.
Well, okay. The fact is that it's funny. My daughter and son-in-law are law professors at Columbia. Columbia was actually very, very calm. The encampments were incredibly peaceful. I'm a person who got, I was in sit-ins in the late 60s, early 70s. I'm that old. I think protesting and free speech among college students should be protected, and these encampments were totally peaceful. And the police were called in to get rid of them, and all of a sudden, you had the police coming in. And by the way, the New York City police were actually quite respectful, unlike a lot of the police that have been, up and down in the South and now at UCLA. They just basically calmly walked kids off, thankfully, as opposed to dragging and using tear gas. But all of a sudden, the president called in the police, and all of a sudden, all the agitators, the Proud Boys came, the other people came. They're now at the gates. They're not allowed in. They're the ones spewing the most stuff. They're the ones that now are getting. Now, that's not to say there are not a few bad apples anywhere. The person who led the group in Columbia had said some really horrible things, a few months ago.
Yeah, you might say that, all right.
But
yeah.
he wasn't sort of, at the time, it was still a peaceful protest. And basically things have gone haywire. Brown, is brought up now as the president sat down, talked to the students, they were trying to work things out. Nothing went awry, Sometimes we try to, the administrators are trying to respond, but they over-respond. And I think, it's made everything look all the worse, and it's been pretty terrible. There's no question about it. I think there's right and wrong on both sides here,
I think there is too, but I'm pointing to a very specific danger.
But I'm not sure. You're thinking the kids at the encampment were the psychopaths. I think that's
I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
I'm saying they're susceptible to invasion by the psychopaths.
Right, well,
I've been in the midst of plenty of protests.
Yeah.
Many of them aimed at me, and I've watched, and I'm a clinician.
Right.
Well, hang on.
Right.
Let me just walk through it. The fact that there are lots of protesters, or there were a few years ago, who came after me, that's beside the point. I don't care about that. What I cared about was 1 in 20 of those protesters who was psychopathic to the bloody core and preying on all those protesters. And I think that the left, generally speaking, is constitutionally incapable of even admitting that people like that exist. It's they're just victims. They're just victims of the social structure. It's if those people show up at your doorstep, like they have been, for example, at Stanford, They show up on your doorstep. You're not going to be thinking they're victims. You're going to be hoping that someone gets them the hell away from you as fast as possible.
But you're also claiming that that one person is going to have a major impact on all these others. I mean, one of the reasons,
that's happened historically.
One of the reasons they may have a greater impact on the right than the left. One reason is that the people on the right, conservatives, are looking for strong leaders. They're looking for those people. They're looking for leaders. The left isn't. The left doesn't value strong leaders and power and those people who are psychopathically, who are psychopaths and can present themselves as strong leaders. So I'm not sure. I mean, you may be right. I don't have the answers here, but I'm not sure it has anything to do. I'm not sure it has to do with boundaries or anything else. I think a lot of it has to do with a greater ability to just ignore and not want to reify and adore these people. I mean, Trump has made it by moving, we are talking about somebody with sociopathic tendencies. We know he threw rocks at toddlers when he was a kid. You read about his childhood. This was a child sent, completely. He was, as a child, exactly as he is an adult, right? He was sent to a military school because his parents couldn't deal with him. He is looked at as a leader by many on the right because they're looking for somebody strong there. The left is not looking for strength and power. That's just not there. And I'm not sure it's a matter of boundaries. That's not to say, look, the left, we do lots of stuff wrong. I'm not saying, we have, everybody's right, terrific here and bad there. There's lots of fault on both sides. But
so let me ask you the same question that I've asked all these Democrats.
Okay.
And I have made a systematic study of this. I've asked every single Democrat I've talked to in the last 6 years the same question. So let me ask you, when does the left go too far?
Well,
how do you know when the left goes too far?
So, for example, here's a case where I thought the case of the defunding the police was an interesting case because if you looked at, was it Minnesota, where if you looked at this whole defund the police thing, and by the way, there's not that much evidence that more police make a difference, but and I discuss this at length in the book, in a community, okay, let's say you're in a city, the people who were most, and it was in Minnesota, I can't remember, was it St. Paul? But anyway, I apologize, bear with me. The folks most likely to be affected by crime in that city were living in a poor Black neighborhoods. And many Blacks there were very against the defund the police. They were against it because they felt they needed the police. And who was it there were a lot of very great Black citizens who were for defunding the police, but who were the folks most for defunding the police? Privileged whites living in the city. Because they weren't worried, right? Now, if it were up to me, I think, that's going too far. When you are not a person affected, your voice shouldn't count as much, right? You should be turning to people who are affected, right? And in that case, I think maybe maybe the left went too far in terms of the defunding the police. It also, by the way, went too far because it had major impact on the election. The assumption is it hurt Democrats in the election because, first of all, the right wants police. That's about defending. And a lot of people who were impacted by crime wanted the police, So anyway, I mean, that's an interesting case of going too far. But I think in deciding when you're going too far, I think you have an obligation to think about who's hurt and who's harmed, who's helped and who's harmed.
Yeah.
And I think that would
especially by the outcome, by the outcome of your
so
political decisions.
Right. So consequentialism matters there, right? That's maybe not a great example, but I think.
Well, look, I can tell you this: that's a better answer than any single Democrat that I've ever talked to has ever given me. Okay. Generally, what I get, I'm telling, it's the truth. And I don't believe that I'm biased in this investigation because I've gone out of my way to talk to Democrats everywhere. Yeah. I've seriously gone out of my way to do it.
No, it's
and
interesting.
That's the best answer that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. And, these days now, I don't know. It's very, there's no question that, we could take these ideologies and weaponize them and push them in all sorts of directions. And the identity politics on the left, which is what you're really talking about, that's where things get tough. There's a reason for identity politics on the left, because if you're trying to get a more equal society, You've got to see which groups need help more than others. Okay, you don't help at an individual. You help at group levels, right? That's a piece of it. The downside of that, of course, is there's competitive victimhood, and it could, and as people thought, it could be, fraction. A society can become sort of torn apart, it's factionalized, but that doesn't happen if in social psychology, if you have a very strong identity with your own group, if you also have a superordinate identity that's shared across groups, American, that is actually very healthy. It's very helpful to have a superordinate. But our problem as a society right now is we're not very good at having that superordinate identity be something people are very proud about calling themselves, right? It's sort of, if we could develop that.
Well, the question that we talked about on the YouTube side too is germane to that. It's like, on what foundation should that superordinate identity be?
Yes.
And what are the things that be based? And what are the things that distressed me about the insistence of social psychologists that our fundamental defenses are illusions is that it undermines the claim that there is something foundational upon which a transcendent
something
identity
real.
that unites can be based.
Yeah.
Well, if we dispense with that, I'll tell you,
Yeah.
if we dispense with that and we fragment into group identity,
Right.
we're going to pay a major league price for that.
Yeah, no,
Like that-
absolutely.
and-
I mean, we need to, I feel like people need to be proud of their own groups, identify, but we sort of somehow have to, and the extent we don't come together, and we, even as left and right, these, superordinate identities just are not going to be very powerful or meaningful. And we need those. We need to be in this together. We need to have a caring society, not just an orderly society, right? We need both, right? We need, and I'm hoping, that when we think about order, unfortunately, order is now often about, people's roles and what women should be doing, what men should be doing, or this and that. I think order could come from people having good jobs, being paid well, that provides order too. So liberals and conservatives could come together around social inequalities and work together. Because both social justice and social order could benefit from sort of less unequal societies. People have said, democracies, whether Brandeis has, said, you can't have a democracy when all the wealth is at the top. And Plutarch talked about, money is going to be the great divider, right? We have great inequalities right now, and I think if we could start working on that, both liberals and conservatives ultimately would be able to satisfy their own moral values, even though right now it's a value on the left. I think it really would help social order in ways that isn't quite acknowledged at this point.